The autumn sunlight spilled through the half-drawn curtains of the Smith family living room, casting crooked shadows across the scuffed hardwood floor. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light, like ghosts of forgotten days. Everything in that room felt like a relic of the past, trapped in time. Catherine's old knitting basket still sat by the couch, untouched for years, a faded strand of yarn dangling from its edge like a quiet question no one dared to ask aloud. Dan Smith shifted in his wheelchair, grimacing as pain stabbed through his hip like a rusted nail. His hands, once strong and sure, trembled slightly on the worn leather of the armrest. He was 50 now, but his bones felt 100 years older. 14 damn years since the accident had wrecked his body and broken the spine of the family. 14 years since Catherine, his Catherine, had vanished like smoke in the wind. "Need a blanket, Dad?" Ellie called from the kitchen, her voice warm but edged with worry. She was already fishing one out of the closet, not waiting for his answer. At 19, Ellie had become his right hand, his caretaker, and, Dan feared sometimes, the glue desperately holding the fractured family together. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he lied, the hoarse rasp of his voice betraying him. Hell, he wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine for over a decade. The house creaked in the silence that followed, as if it too were straining under the weight of old ghosts. "What time did Ethan say he'd be here?" Dan asked, glancing at the dusty clock on the wall. Mark, the second oldest, checked his phone, his brows tightening. "Said around 6. Should be any minute now." Mark had Catherine's eyes but none of her softness. He'd taken the brunt of their new life, put himself through college while working double shifts and carrying the quiet burden of their mother's absence like a stone in his chest. He didn't talk about it much anymore, not since he'd settled into his job downtown, but Dan could see it in his eyes. The weight never left. "Can someone turn the damn TV down?" Leah snapped from the dining room. She was 23 now and ran the local bookstore, her dark hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She moved like someone always braced for impact, setting the table with mechanical precision. Aiden, once Aldi, now a gangly 15-year-old with too much attitude for his own good, slouched on the couch, flipping through channels with the kind of apathy only teenagers could master. He reluctantly thumbed the volume down, grumbling, "I'm just looking for a good movie for tonight." Dan caught a glimpse of the title on the screen, some sci-fi flick with aliens disguised as humans. He forced a smile. "No aliens," Dan said softly. "You know Ellie doesn't like M." Ellie reappeared from the kitchen, carrying a stack of plates. "I don't mind aliens," she said, quirking an eyebrow. "Just not the ones that explode out of people's chests while we're eating dessert." Aiden snorted a laugh, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the old days, before everything went sideways. But the moment was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Behind every smile lingered the shadow of what they'd lost. Every weekend, like clockwork, they tried to pretend. Tried to stitch their broken family back together with routine. Dinner, conversation, a movie. A thin mask over the crater left by Catherine's disappearance. "The table's ready," Leah announced, stepping back to admire her work. 5 place settings, each meticulously arranged. But it was the 6th plate at the head of the table, for Ethan, that drew Dan's gaze. That plate felt like an omen. "Something smells amazing," Mark said, trying for cheerfulness as he headed to the dining room. "Lasagna," Ellie replied proudly. "And I made garlic bread too." Aiden finally abandoned his hunt for movies and flopped into his seat. "Can we start?" "I'm starving." Dan wheeled himself to his place at the head of the table, shaking his head slowly. "We wait for Ethan. We always wait until everyone's here." "But the food's getting cold," Aiden whined, his eyes locked hungrily on the steaming dish. "I'll call him," Mark offered, already pulling out his phone. He frowned. No answer. Straight to voicemail. A chill seeped into the room, subtle but sharp, like winter creeping in through a cracked window. Dan's gut twisted in a way he didn't like. Something was off tonight. He felt it in his bones. Minutes ticked by. The lasagna stopped steaming. The ice in their glasses began to melt, slow rivers of water pooling beneath them. Dan checked his watch again, his mind gnawed by unease. Where the hell was Ethan? Just as Leah opened her mouth to suggest they eat without him, the sound of tires on gravel made them all freeze. A car door slammed outside. The front door burst open, and there stood Ethan, flushed and breathless, eyes wild with something that chilled Dan to the marrow. "Sorry I'm late," Ethan panted, but there was an urgency to his voice that didn't match the words. His shirt was rumpled, his tie loosened, dark hair plastered to his forehead. Dan's heart thudded heavily in his chest. "It's fine, we were just about to," Dan began. But Ethan cut him off, his voice tight, almost cracking. "I found something." And just like that, dinner was forgotten. The ghosts at their table had finally spoken. The air in the room snapped tight like a rubber band stretched to its limit. Ethan's eyes darted from face to face, as if he wasn't sure where to start. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, sweat beading along his temples. He clutched his phone in one hand, knuckles white, like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. "What is it?" Dan rasped, his voice rough as gravel. Ethan swallowed hard, still standing by the doorway. He didn't move to sit. He couldn't. His legs might have been shaking under him for all they knew. "I got a call," he said, almost breathless. "From Detective Barnes." A pause thick as tar. "They found Mom's car." The words dropped like a brick in the center of the table. Ellie's hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered, eyes wide. "No way." Mark's expression tightened, brows knitting hard. He shook his head like he could will the words away. "Ethan, come on, man. Don't do this. Not tonight." But Ethan pressed on, his voice rising, desperate and raw. "I'm serious. They pulled it out of the river. Miller's Lake." Leah froze, a plate still in her hand, hovering over the table. "Miller's Lake," she repeated, her voice brittle. That's 30 miles away from where she was last seen." "Exactly." Ethan fired back. His eyes burned with a feverish light. She never would have gone out there. Not unless something was wrong. Mark slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the glasses, making the ice jump in their cups. "Jesus, Ethan. We agreed. We all agreed, no more about Mom during family time. You think I give a damn about that right now?" Ethan snapped. "They found her car, Mark. Not a rumor, not a false lead, her actual goddamn car." Dan's throat worked like he was trying to swallow a stone. His voice came out in a low rasp. Did they find her?" Ethan's gaze flickered to his father, his voice dropping an octave. He hesitated, just long enough to let dread creep into the cracks of the room. "They're still processing the scene," he admitted. "No body. Yet." The silence that followed was crushing. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum, a void sucking the air straight out of their lungs. Ellie's lower lip trembled. She set the plates down shakily and moved to her father's side, her hand settling on his trembling shoulder. "Dad, breathe," she whispered. Dan's eyes, usually dulled by pain and resignation, were sharp with something new, fear. Aiden broke the silence, his teenage voice cracking. "Does this mean she's dead?" The question stabbed through the room like an ice pick. Nobody had an answer. Not even Ethan. "I don't know," Ethan finally admitted, running a hand through his damp hair. "But listen, there's more." "Of course there is," Leah muttered bitterly, slamming the cutlery drawer shut so hard it clanged like thunder. "They think," Ethan's voice caught for a second. He steadied himself, then forced the words out. "They think the car was sunk on purpose. Windows rolled down. No crash damage. Ellie gasped. Dan's fists clenched on the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles pale. Mark shot to his feet. Bullshit, he snapped. That's bull, he caught himself, throwing a glance at Aiden, but the damage was done. No, Mark, Ethan barked. It's not. It's not bullshit. And you know it. For a heartbeat, it looked like Mark might throw something, his phone, his plate, maybe his whole damn self, but instead, he just stood there, chest heaving. Leah spoke next, her voice tight and bitter, barely more than a hiss. So she really did it. She ran off. She left us. She wanted us to believe she was dead. That's not what I'm saying, Ethan shot back. We don't know that. Something's off. Way off. Mark snorted bitterly. Come on, Ethan. After everything. Dad's accident, the bills, 5 kids to feed, and poof, she vanishes. Sounds like a damn escape plan to me. Ethan's eyes darkened, flaring with fire. She wouldn't have done that to us. Not Mom. The argument crackled like a live wire, the tension so thick it practically buzzed in the air. Dan, silent until now, finally forced his voice into the storm. Enough, he rasped. Enough, all of you. His coughing fit came hard and fast, bending him over as Ellie scrambled to grab a glass of water. The sound of his struggle cut through the rising chaos like a blade. The siblings froze, guilt flashing across their faces. Even Mark deflated, rubbing a hand over his face. When Dan finally caught his breath, he looked at Ethan with eyes that held something between hope and dread. Tell me everything, he said, his voice gravelly but steady. Ethan took a breath that rattled in his chest. Detective Barnes wants us to go down there. To the lake. Tonight. Mark's jaw tightened. It's already dark. Good, Ethan shot back, voice sharp as broken glass. Because whatever's out there. I want to see it for myself. The room felt like it had been drained of oxygen. Even the walls seemed to press inward, suffocating the air between them. No one moved. No one spoke. The lasagna sat in the center of the table, wilted and forgotten, steam long gone like the fragile piece that had held the family together. Mark broke first, of course he did. He always did. He shoved his chair back with a screech that felt like nails dragging across glass. You know what? Screw this, he snapped, pacing across the room like a caged animal. He ran both hands through his hair, frustration simmering just below his skin. 14 goddamn years, Ethan. 14. You really think we haven't all played out every scenario in our heads? Ethan stiffened, his eyes locked on Mark like crosshairs. Not like this. Not with her car at the bottom of a river. Mark barked out a humorless laugh, sharp and hollow. Jesus, listen to yourself. Maybe she wanted it there. Maybe she wanted to disappear. Did you ever think of that? Ellie's voice came in soft, like she was trying to stitch the fabric of the family back together with words alone. Mark, please, she said, placing a trembling hand on Dan's shoulder as he coughed into his fist, his face pale. Let's not fight. Not tonight. Why the hell not? Mark shot back, his voice cracking under the strain. He gestured wildly at the table, at the lifeless dinner, at the storm that had swallowed their evening whole. Because it's family night. Surprise, Ellie, this family's been broken for years. Leah, who had been eerily quiet, set her fork down with slow, deliberate calm, but her eyes blazed. He's not wrong, she said coldly. Dad's stuck in that chair, the bills piled so high we couldn't breathe, and Mom. She took the easy way out. Dan's throat worked hard, but no words came. His eyes glistened, full of things he couldn't say. Regret? Anger? Maybe both. You don't know that, Ethan growled. His fists clenched tight at his sides. You don't know. Leah's gaze snapped to him, sharp as broken glass. Don't I? She left, Ethan. She left all of us. No calls, no letters, not even a damn postcard. Aiden's voice, fragile, cracking like thin ice, crept into the tension. Maybe she couldn't, he said, barely above a whisper. That tiny spark flickered in the heavy silence, and for a heartbeat, everyone stilled. Mark exhaled sharply through his nose. Kid, she could've. If she wanted to, she would've. End of story. No, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous now. End of your story. Not mine. His eyes, fierce and unblinking, swept across his siblings. You all gave up on her, he accused. You folded. I never did. And look where it got you, Mark snapped. Chasing ghosts. Dan finally found his voice, weak but cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. Enough, he croaked, but no one listened. The argument erupted like a powder keg. Voices overlapped, accusations flew, old wounds torn open like they'd been waiting just beneath the surface all these years. You think you're better than us? Maybe if you'd actually helped instead of running off on your wild goose chases. Helped? I sacrificed more than anyone. Bullshit, Ethan. Dan coughed so hard his body shuddered violently, tipping dangerously in his wheelchair. Ellie shrieked and rushed to steady him, her face stricken with fear. Dad, she cried, fumbling for his water. The room froze, panic slamming into them like a brick wall. Dan wheezed, struggling to breathe. His knuckles were white on the armrests, veins standing out like cords. Ethan moved fast, rounding the table and helping Ellie prop their father up. Dad, stay with me, he urged, his own panic sharpening his words. For a long, harrowing moment, it seemed like Dan might not recover. Then, slowly, raggedly, he sucked in a shallow breath. Christ, Mark muttered, his bravado cracking. Ellie's hands trembled as she dabbed her father's forehead with a napkin. Dad, you okay? Her voice was thin, frayed at the edges. Dan nodded weakly. His lips parted, and he rasped, I've been waiting, 14 years, for tonight. The weight of that confession crushed the air from the room. Ethan swallowed hard, throat tight. Then we go, he said, resolve hardening in his chest. To Miller's Lake. Right now. Mark shook his head in disbelief. Are you out of your mind? It's pitch black out there, Ethan. What the hell do you think we're gonna find in the dark? Ethan's gaze burned bright. Whatever's left of the truth. Dan's eyes fluttered open, sharper than they'd been all evening. His voice was hoarse but firm. I need to see it, he whispered. No, Dad, you need to rest, Ellie protested, but Dan shook his head with grim determination. I need to see it with my own eyes, Dan repeated, fire sparking in his tired gaze. A beat of silence passed, the family teetering on the edge of a choice none of them were ready to make. Finally, Mark cursed under his breath. Damn it, he said, rubbing a hand down his face. Fine. But we all go. Together. Leah sighed, crossing her arms tight over her chest. This is insane. No, Ethan countered, a fierce edge in his voice. This is family. The tires crunched over the gravel road as the family's old SUV crawled toward Miller's Lake, headlights slicing through the thick black night like desperate searchlights. Inside the car, the tension was suffocating, a living thing that pressed on their chests and twisted in their guts. No one spoke. The old radio crackled static, as if even the airwaves were too afraid to make a sound tonight. Ethan sat in the front passenger seat, fists clenched in his lap, eyes locked on the narrowing path ahead. Every mile closer, his pulse thumped harder in his throat. He could feel it, like something rotten festering just beneath the surface of this quiet night. Dan, strapped into the seat behind Ethan, looked like a ghost under the harsh dome light. He stared out the window, his reflection hollow-eyed in the glass, lips moving in silent prayer. In the back, Ellie kept her hand tight around her father's wrist, checking his pulse every few minutes with anxious fingers. Mark gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had gone bone white, the tension in his jaw sharp enough to cut steel. "This place gives me the creeps," Aiden mumbled, peering out the window into the dark woods crowding the road. "You and me both," Leah replied, her arms crossed so tight it looked like she was holding herself together by force. "Cut the chatter," Mark snapped, his voice taut. "We're almost there." The words had barely left his mouth when the road dipped, and there it was, Miller's Lake. The headlights washed over the water, black and still as oil. In the glare, they could see yellow police tape fluttering like dying flags and the silhouettes of a few tired-looking patrol cars parked by the bank. Detective Barnes stood just beyond the tape, hands shoved in his pockets, his trench coat flapping in the chill wind. Mark killed the engine, and silence swallowed them whole. "Everybody stay close," Ethan ordered as they climbed out, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Detective," he called. Barnes turned, his face carved from stone. Under the harsh flash of a deputy's flashlight, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Smiths," he greeted grimly. His eyes swept over the family, lingering a beat longer on Dan's frail frame. "Didn't think you'd actually come." "We had to," Ethan said, his voice ironclad. Barnes exhaled a cloud of vapor into the cold air. "All right, but brace yourselves. It's not pretty." He led them closer, and the deeper they went, the colder it seemed to get. Not just from the night chill, this cold came from inside their bones. The crane that had pulled the car from the lake still sat there, hulking and rusted, chains dangling like the limbs of a metal corpse. The mud on the bank stank of algae and decay. And there, half covered by a tarp, was Catherine's blue sedan. Ellie's breath hitched. Leah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Jesus," Mark muttered, barely able to look. The car was a wreck, not from impact, but from time and water. Barnacles clung to the frame. Moss crawled over the windows. The back bumper hung loose, as if gnawed by something beneath the surface. But what caught Ethan's eye wasn't the ruin of the car, it was what lay on the ground beside it. Evidence bags. Dozens of them. Inside one, a warped family photograph, waterlogged but unmistakable. Catherine smiling in the kitchen, Aiden barely a toddler in her lap. Inside another, a leather-bound planner, embossed with the initials ES. Ethan's breath froze in his chest. "That's hers," Dan rasped, his voice full of cracked disbelief. Barnes crouched beside the evidence and picked up another bag, this one holding a scrap of paper, edges curled and blackened as though it had been half-burned. He held it up for them to see. Scrawled in jagged ink were just 3 chilling words. "Forgive me. Run." The blood drained from Ethan's face. "What the hell does that mean?" Mark demanded, stepping closer. Barnes shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But it gets worse." He waved them toward the edge of the lake, where deputies had cordoned off another section of shoreline. Flashlights swept over tire tracks, fresh ones, leading straight into the woods. "Someone was here," Barnes said grimly. "Recently. They came back for something," Ethan murmured, every hair on his arm standing on end. Dan's gaze hardened, and for the first time in years, there was steel in his voice. "Or someone." Aiden shuffled closer to his father, whispering, "Dad, let's go home." But there was no turning back. Barnes looked at Ethan, expression grim. "Your mom's story isn't finished," he said. "Not by a damn sight." Ethan's jaw tightened. His whole life had led to this moment, every sleepless night, every unanswered question. "We follow the tracks," he said, voice low and sure. "Ethan," Mark started, but his brother cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice through stone. "We follow the tracks," Ethan repeated, fire burning in his eyes. And without another word, the Smith family plunged into the dark woods, chasing ghosts through the night. The woods swallowed them whole. Every step deeper felt like crossing some invisible threshold, a point of no return that none of them dared speak out loud. Tree branches clawed at their jackets like skeletal fingers, and the thick underbrush snagged their ankles, as if the forest itself wanted to drag them down. "Keep your eyes sharp," Barnes warned, his flashlight beam darting across the dirt path, illuminating tire ruts that cut deep into the mud. Behind him, Dan wheezed, his breath shallow and uneven. Ellie hovered at his side, her arm hooked tightly through his to steady him over the rough ground. Fear trembled in her chest, but she forced her legs to move, step after step, because quitting wasn't an option. Not tonight. Mark followed close, jaw clenched so tight it ached. Leah's arms were wrapped around herself, her eyes wide, darting toward every crackle in the underbrush like she expected something, or someone, to lunge out from the shadows. "I really hate this," Aiden muttered under his breath. "This is some serious horror movie crap." "Keep moving," Ethan snapped, his voice like ice. There was no humor left in him. No fear either, only fire. He was running on fumes and fury, adrenaline scorching his veins. Up ahead, the tire tracks veered off the path and dipped into a narrow, overgrown trail barely wide enough for the vehicle that had passed through. Barnes crouched low, running his fingers over a freshly broken twig. "Not more than an hour ahead of us," he said grimly. "Maybe less." "What the hell are we even chasing?" Mark asked, tension fraying his voice. "You really think Mom's alive out here somewhere?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze swept the woods, cold and calculating. He wanted to believe God, more than anything. But the deeper they went, the more it felt like they were chasing shadows. "She left us a message," Ethan said finally, his voice rough. "Forgive me. Run. She's trying to tell us something. Or warn us," Leah added, her tone brittle. "Same damn thing," Barnes muttered. Suddenly, a sharp crack shattered the quiet, the unmistakable snap of a branch under heavy weight. They all froze. Barnes raised his hand, signaling for silence, then gestured toward a dense thicket ahead. His flashlight caught movement, a flash of dark clothing vanishing between the trees. "Go!" Barnes barked. They crashed forward as one, branches whipping at their faces, adrenaline lighting their nerves on fire. Dan struggled, gasping, but Ellie and Mark kept him moving. "Dad, just hold on," Ellie pleaded, her heart hammering in her chest. The forest thinned just enough to reveal a small clearing ahead, moonlight bleeding through the tangled canopy. In the center of the clearing sat a rusting shipping container, its side scarred with graffiti and time. "What the hell?" Mark breathed. Barnes motioned them to stay back and crept toward it, weapon drawn. He pressed his ear to the metal wall, lips tight. Then, with a sharp nod, he yanked the door open. Empty. Just dust, old tarp, and the sickly smell of damp metal. "Shit," Barnes cursed. "They're gone." But Ethan wasn't looking at the container. His eyes were fixed on the ground, at a set of footprints leading away from the clearing. Fresh. Deep. "Look," he said hoarsely, pointing. Barnes followed his gaze and cursed again under his breath. "Whoever they are, they're moving fast." Leah's eyes narrowed as she scanned the tracks. "There's more than one set." "Two people," Barnes confirmed grimly. "Maybe three." Aiden swallowed hard, his voice tight with fear. "You think one of them is Mom?" Ethan's answer was steel, "I'm not leaving this damn forest until we find out." They pushed on. The trail grew steeper, the trees leaning in closer, as if the woods themselves were conspiring to bury the truth. Twigs snapped beneath their boots, the chill in the air sharp enough to sting. Out of nowhere, a sharp crack split the air. Gunfire. Everyone hit the ground instinctively, hearts slamming into their ribs. "Down!" Barnes barked, shielding the family with his body. "Was that?" Ellie's words caught in her throat. "Yeah," Mark hissed, eyes wide. "It was." Barnes peeked over the brush, scanning the darkness. Someone's trying to scare us off, he growled. Or worse. Well, it's not working, Ethan spat, crawling forward on his elbows, every muscle in his body coiled tight. He didn't care if it was reckless. He needed to see this through. Barnes slid up beside him, grim-faced. Kid, you got guts, I'll give you that. Another shot rang out, closer this time, thunking into a tree just inches from Ethan's head. Jesus Christ! Mark shouted, dragging Ethan back by the collar. But Ethan shoved him off, defiant fire blazing in his eyes. No. They're running scared. They don't want us to see what's at the end of this trail. They're damn well gonna kill us trying to stop us. Mark shouted back. Let them try, Ethan growled. For a beat, no one spoke. The air was thick with terror and adrenaline. Then Dan's voice cut through, raspy but fierce. Go, he wheezed. Find her. Barnes gave a short nod. We move. Fast. They tore through the woods, chasing shadows in the dark, hearts pounding like war drums, the truth dangling just out of reach. But they weren't turning back. Not now. Not ever. The forest exploded into motion. The Smith family charged forward, adrenaline blasting through their veins like rocket fuel. Branches whipped their faces, roots clawed at their feet, but they didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The truth wasn't a breadcrumb trail anymore, it was a full damn fire, lighting up the night, pulling them deeper into the abyss. Ethan's chest burned, but he ran harder. His mind screamed only one thing, over and over, Mom. Ahead, Barnes skidded to a halt, hand shooting up in a sharp signal. They stumbled to a stop beside him, hearts thunderous in their chests. There, Barnes whispered, pointing. Through the trees, at the edge of an old quarry, the scene unfolded like some nightmare born in the dark corners of their worst fears. Two figures, shadowy, desperate, dragged a third between them. The woman's legs scraped uselessly against the dirt, her head lolling weakly. Ethan's heart dropped like a stone in his chest. Mom, he breathed. The name felt like a prayer, like a curse. Catherine. Even in the dim light, he knew it was her. The way her shoulders curled forward, the length of her dark hair, though streaked with gray and tangled with leaves. There was no mistaking the woman who had haunted his dreams for 14 agonizing years. Son of a bitch, Mark growled, fists clenching so tight they shook. We end this now, Barnes said, steady and grim. Before anyone could argue, he raised his weapon and shouted into the dark. Police! Drop her now. The men froze, jerking their heads toward the sound. One of them, thin, wiry, with a rat-like sneer, yanked a pistol from his belt and fired blindly into the trees. Down! Barnes barked, dragging the family behind a fallen log as bullets cracked through the night air. Mark cursed under his breath. Jesus Christ, they're gonna kill her. Not if I can help it, Ethan snarled. Without thinking, he broke from cover. Ethan! Ellie screamed, scrambling after him, but Barnes held her back. Wait, the detective barked. But it was too late. Fueled by pure, reckless fury, Ethan sprinted toward the quarry's edge. Dirt and rocks skidded beneath his boots as he barreled straight at the gunman. The shooter's eyes went wide with surprise, too slow to react before Ethan slammed into him full force, sending the man sprawling. The gun clattered from his grasp and disappeared over the rocky ledge. The second man drew a knife, but before he could lunge, Barnes's shot rang out, clean and precise. The blade dropped from the man's hand as he crumpled to the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder and howling curses. Dan, breathless and pale, wheeled himself forward, his voice ragged with desperation. Catherine, he rasped. Catherine's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice. Weak, bruised, but alive. Dan, she whispered, like she wasn't sure if he was real. Ellie and Leah bolted from behind cover, rushing to their mother's side. Tears streamed down Ellie's face as she cupped Catherine's dirt-smeared cheeks. "Oh my God, Mom, we found you," she choked out. Catherine's gaze swept over her children, over Dan, over the faces she had thought she'd never see again. Her lips trembled. "You shouldn't have come," she croaked, her voice brittle as glass. Ethan crouched beside her, his heart thundering in his chest. "Mom, it's over. We're taking you home." But she shook her head, weak but resolute. "You don't understand. They're not the only ones." Barnes's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, a low rumble shuddered through the ground beneath their feet. "What the hell is that?" Mark snapped, spinning toward the sound. From deeper in the quarry, headlights flicked on, not one, not two, but 3 vehicles roaring to life in the darkness. Barnes's expression turned grim. Reinforcements. The engines screamed as the vehicles tore across the quarry floor, kicking up clouds of dust. Armed men hung from the sides, their silhouettes sharp and lethal against the blinding glare of headlights. "Move!" Barnes barked. "Get to cover." But there was nowhere left to run. "Dad!" Ellie cried, pushing Dan's wheelchair back toward the tree line, but the terrain was too rough. The wheels caught on loose rocks. "Go," Dan urged her, his voice fierce despite his failing body. "Take your mother and run." "No!" Ellie shouted. "We're not leaving you." The roar of engines grew deafening. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights exploded through the darkness as squad cars crested the hill behind them, deputies spilling out, weapons raised. Barnes's backup had arrived. Gunfire erupted, deafening and wild. The quarry became chaos incarnate, bullets slicing the air, shouting, the roar of engines and the screams of wounded men. In the chaos, Ethan grabbed his mother and pulled her behind a boulder as deputies stormed the quarry. Barnes led the charge, his sidearm barking like thunder. Minutes felt like hours. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. Smoke curled into the cold night sky. The enemy vehicles, disabled and smoldering, lay scattered across the quarry. The armed men were either dead, wounded, or in cuffs. Ethan's chest heaved as he clung to his mother, tears streaking his dirt-stained face. "It's over," he whispered, voice raw. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she touched his cheek, her hand trembling. "No," she said, a shadow of sorrow in her voice. "It's just beginning." Dan reached for her hand, and she took it, her fingers lacing tightly with his. Barnes, bloodied but standing, approached, his gaze sharp but laced with respect. "We'll get you safe," he promised. "All of you." As dawn crept over the horizon, bathing the quarry in pale light, the Smith family stood together at the edge of the wreckage. Scarred but united. The nightmare was over. Or so they thought.